back. I am always ecstatic to be able to say welcome to our next guest. Her name is Christine Douglas Williams. She is a remarkably, courageous as well as enterprising investigative reporter, a journalist with many awards to her uh, credit, notably in television as well as in the written word. She is these days a really important contributor to a favorite web resource of ours, that is jihadwatch.org, Robert Spencer's outstanding publication. Christine has been author of several important books as well. The Challenge of Modernizing Islam, and one she did for the Center for Security Policy Press entitled Fired by the Government of Canada for Criticizing Islam. She is a great friend of mine, and we're always delighted, as I say, to have a chance to pick her brains about what's going on north of the border, as well as her insights into what's happening elsewhere around the world, including here. Christine, thanks so much for joining us once again. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Frank. Always terrific to talk to you.
Thank you. Let me ask you to talk about two things, but maybe first in the context of developments in Canada. I'm interested in your thoughts about, the challenge of modernizing Islam, one, and the very serious threats to freedom of speech that we're seeing here in the United States now, we're seeing in Europe. You've been reporting on those topics, but give us a sense of what maybe the proverbial canary in the mine shaft north of our border, Canada, is experiencing with regard to both of these phenomena.
Frank, it's not in a it's not a good place right now to be in Canada. I
Mm.
mean, there are many reasons why you hear political pundits, mostly on the right, of course, challenging our leader Justin Trudeau for his totalitarian tendencies. Even on the left, with media that is basically bought out. I mean, you're looking at the national television station, in fact, network CBC, $1.4 billion a year.
Mm.
The media in Canada, the leftists, is virtually bought out by Justin Trudeau. And even they come up and criticize how heavy handed he could be in this country. But
Wow.
free speech is bad. I mean, if they don't get you by the hate laws in Canada, somebody will get you, particularly the Islamists, with a civil suit that could be in the millions.
Mm.
So it's a dangerous place to be. I would come right out and say it. It's a dangerous place to be. We saw with a trucking convoy how these patriots were treated. First
Hmm.
of all, the leftist media acted as if they were a violent threat. Even Trudeau called them and basically summed it up and called them thugs and
Yes.
racists and every name in the book, which proved totally untrue. These people were singing hymns. I mean, kids were jumping up on little these little devices they had that were like balloons, and I mean, it was a real show of patriotism.
Mm.
But they were abused by police, and most of the charges have been thrown out. And now you have Rolling Thunder, a motorcycle convoy that went to Ottawa, and they're being treated exactly the same way. It's
Wow.
it's horrendous, and there's really no basis for it except totalitarian tendencies.
Yeah. And those totalitarian tendencies are affecting not just freedom of speech, but also giving a kind of pass, it seems, to Islamists who have their own totalitarian impulses, as you have documented better than probably most of us. Give us a flavor of how these are coming together at the moment, and also introduce to our audience a rising star in the opposition ranks, who may be a hopeful sign that all is not lost in Canada. And these scores, among others.
Anything you virtually say in criticism against Muslim groups in Canada, you're going to get nabbed for it. You're going to get
Uh,
called Islamophobic. And you and I know, and many others watching, they know full well that this is a stratagem to shut down any criticism of Islam, a kind of what you would call a tacit version
mm,
of Pakistani blasphemy laws that we see in
mhm.
Canada. And we're under M103, and people say, oh, it's not legislation. But for goodness sakes, it was backed up by a $23 million follow-up project to monitor citizens for compliance. And more, the government is starting to gain influence of the internet. So you basically can't criticize Islam in a way that they would deem offensive, the groups in Canada, or even put them under scrutiny for
mm,
some of the dealings. Like we saw years ago, Irfan Canada, it was outlawed by the government under Harper as a terrorist entity, and they're fighting that now.
mm,
But it's a difficult game here in Canada. I won't even call it a game because
mm,
anytime the right tries to discuss truth, and it doesn't even have to be anything that's so called offensive
mm,
or venomous, just truth that could
right,
be perceived as a threat by the socialist mentality or by the Islamists, you get shut down as being Islamophobic, being racist.
mm,
But as you mentioned, and I'm glad you brought this up, Frank, there is a hopeful. Now, during the convoy that we saw in February in Ottawa, there was one fellow that I was so happy personally to see thrown out of the conservative leadership, Aaron O'Toole. He was drifting further and further left because you see, in Canada, you've got this element in the right, in the political circles, that care more about political posturing than they care about their
mm,
jobs or care about Canadians. And what they do is that they listen to the talking points everywhere. It's the same of the leftists, and they feel, well, if they move further and further left, they're going to grab the popularity among the conservatives, but they're not. So
mhm,
during the convoy, people saw what was going on. They saw how Ottawa police were treating these hardworking truckers that just were trying to make a living instead of these weird mandates that Trudeau persists. I mean,
yeah.
Canada's become a backward country. So out of that,
This is the vaccine mandate
yes,
specifically, right?
yes, and that kind of sparked
COVID.
the trucker convoy. But fast forward now, during that protest, there was one politician, a conservative politician, Pierre Poilievre. He's a member of parliament, and he stood up in support of them.
Mm,
And you look at Aaron O'Toole. Well, I mean, and he met with them, but he kind of disavowed them in a way,
mm,
and that wasn't pleasing. So what happens in a vote, and not so close, when he gets thrown out by his own caucus?
mm,
Now there's a leadership vote that's coming up on June 10th. And Pierre Poilievre threw his hat in the ring from early, and he is the hopeful. It is shocking, in fact, to so many to
mm.
see the star status he's drawing every time he goes out to his campaign to various cities, and he is the one that shows the most promise, not only to unite the right, but to potentially stand as a formidable opponent against Justin Trudeau in 2025, at which time Canada is going to be under that curse for 10 years,
Yeah,
a
my
decade.
lord. And as you say, that curse has metastasized really in a way that it may have started out as sort of your garden variety leftist, loopy leftist at that, but it has really, with the trucker convoy being the pretext, now turned into something downright, well, fascistic, I guess, or totalitarian, as you say. And it makes all the more admirable what you do day in and day out, Christine Douglas Williams, as you seek to bring the truth to bear, despite efforts to suppress it or otherwise um, intimidate. And I just wonder, as you're talking to principally an American audience, your insights into what is now being called the Disinformation Governance Board, nested inside the Department of Homeland Security, no less. Um, Drawing on what you've experienced in Ottawa and Canada more generally, and what you see as the further trajectory of the Trudeau regime, if it is not successfully challenged by Poilievre or whomever, what would you say to Americans by way of warnings in terms of specifically resisting this kind of thing, peacefully, of course, but nonetheless resisting it before it is locked in a way that you're now contending with in Canada?
I would say that nobody's safe.
Mm.
On the surface, it looks like, well, if you shut down the so-called right, you call them populist, you call them racist, nationalists, whatever you call them, it may seem like
Domestic terrorists is a term
that's
that's
it.
being
But
chosen
it
here.
comes back to haunt everybody.
Hmm.
Every rational person out there, even if you're a rational person on the left, it eventually metastasizes, and that couldn't have been a better word. It becomes cancerous, where it starts to affect everybody. And it doesn't stop at just being able to criticize, being able to have a public discussion about issues. What happens eventually is that you find that these foreign interests, like the Muslim Brotherhood, like communism, starts to infringe on you more and more until you start losing more and more freedoms. It isn't
Yes.
satisfied with free speech. It continues to rot
Hmm.
everything you've built, all the bloodshed for the safety, for the freedoms of America. We don't want to see this go in vain. But
Hmm.
America is threatened like never before. Canada is
Amen.
also threatened. We're worse
Yeah.
in that case because we have to be so careful what we say here and what we do over here,
Yeah.
even when it's innocent and it's of a warning. But America really is at the cliff.
Yeah.
It
Well,
needs to wake up
you may
and
be
get up.
off the cliff already, unfortunately, in Canada, but your warnings about what is in store for us if we don't uh, recognize the peril and insist on a course correction. I think starting with the dismantling of this disinformation governance board, for
Yes.
starters, of course. But the main point is yours is so well taken, and that is this is only the beginning. An assault on what's known as our First Amendment rights here is really aimed at the entirety of the Constitution, and
Twitter's a hope.
that
Twitter's a
cannot.
hope
Well,
now.
I hope that the guy who's trying to fix it is actually a hope too. We'll
I
see.
hope.
But in the
Yes.
meantime, Christine Douglas Williams, thank you for your well, very clear-eyed view of what is happening on both sides of the border and elsewhere around the world as well. And you can find a great deal more about Christine and her writings at jihadwatch.org. Come back to us with updates if you would soon, please. Next up, we're going to speak with Cleo Pascal about India and China's threat to it right after this.